NUTCRACKER and the Mouse King. Chapter 1. Christmas Eve. During the day of the 24th of December, the children of Dr. Stahlbaum were not permitted to enter the parlor, let alone the drawing room. So Fritz and Mary quietly sat in a corner of their chamber. Fritz, in great secrecy, whispered to his little sister, she was only just 7 years old, that ever since the morning he had heard rustling, rattling, and gentle knocking in the forbidden rooms, he also saw a little dark man with a large box under his arm, sneaking through the hall. It was nobody but Godfather Drosselmeyer.
What wonderful things have Godfather Drosselmeyer made for us this time?
Counselor Drosselmeyer was not a very handsome man. He was small and thin, had many wrinkles in his face. Over his right eye, he had a large black patch, and he was bald and wore a very nice white wig ingenuously made of glass. He himself was not much less ingenious. He understood all about clocks and watches, and could even make them. Whenever he came, he always brought something amusing for the children. A funny little old man who moved his eyes and was offering compliments, or a box, from which a little bird flew out. For the Christmas, he had always prepared some especially beautiful and extraordinary piece of work.
What a tricky present it will be this time. How do you think?
It'll be a castle where all kinds of fine soldiers will march. Then other soldiers would come and try to take the castle, but the soldiers inside would raise alarm and their cannons will fire. Boom, boom, boom!
No way! Godfather has told me of a lovely garden. There would be a great lake upon which beautiful swans will swim, with golden collars around their necks. Then a girl will come out of the garden and step down to the lake. She will feed the swans with sweet marchpane.
Swans never eat any marchpane, and even Godfather himself can't make a whole garden.
The children went on guessing what a wonderful presents Papa, Mama, and Godfather Drosselmeyer had prepared for them. Meanwhile, in the drawing room, their parents were arranging Christmas gifts. It had become quite dark. Fritz and Mary sat close together. Finally, the silver bell rang. The doors opened. Papa and Mama stepped into the room and took children by the hands. "Come, dear children, let's see what Lord Jesus has brought you this year." Chapter 2. The Gifts. My dear listeners, call into your mind the moment when you first saw your Christmas gifts last year. You will then be able to imagine the delight of Fritz and Mary as they stood looking over the surprise. Their eyes sparkled with wonder.
How beautiful!
Fritz said nothing but gave 2 or 3 leaps in the air higher than he had ever done before. A tall fir tree stood in the middle of the room, decorated with gold and silver apples, while sugar almonds, sweets, and every kind of confectionery hung like blossoms upon its branches. Around the tree all were spark and glitter. Oh, how many wonderful things were there! Mary spied the prettiest doll, a nice toy tea set, and what eclipsed all the rest, a silk dress ornamented with colorful ribbons.
What a sweet, dear dress. May I put it on? Oh, really?
Meanwhile, Fritz already has galloped around the room 3 or 4 times on his new bay horse, which he had found fastened by its bridle to the table with presents.
Wow, a wild creature that horse is, but that's nothing. I would soon tame it.
The children had now become somewhat composed and turned to the picture books, which lay open on the table. When again, the children knew that Godfather Drosselmeyer was now about to display his Christmas gift, and ran towards a table that stood against the wall. The folding screen behind which table had remained concealed was quickly put aside. Oh, what the children saw! Upon a green meadow, spangled with flowers, stood a castle with glass windows and golden turrets. A musical clock began to play. The doors and windows flew open, and elegantly made little men in feathered hats and women with long flowing trains were seen walking in the rooms. The middle hall was sparkling. So many candles were burning in silver chandeliers. A man in an emerald green cloak at intervals put his head out of the window, nodded, and then disappeared. Now and then near the door of the castle appeared a small copy of Godfather Drosselmeyer, only that he was not much bigger than Papa's thumb. The puppet looked about him, and then went in again. Fritz put his arms upon the table and gazed at the beautiful castle for a long time.
Godfather, let me go into your castle.
It cannot be done, my dear. Godfather Drosselmeyer was right. Asking to be led into a castle, which with all its golden turrets was not as high as his head, was foolish, and Fritz agreed with that. Time ticked by. The men and women kept walking back and forth inside the castle, and the Emerald Man looked out his window, and a puppet of Godfather Drosselmeyer came to the door.
Godfather, come out this time at the other door.
That can never be, dear Fritz.
Well then, let the green man who peeps out at the window walk about with the rest.
And that can never be. As the mechanism is made, so it must remain.
So it must remain, all that can never be. Listen, Godfather, if your little figures there can do nothing else but always the same thing, they are good for nothing. I don't care about them. My hussars are much better. They can march backwards and forwards as I ordered them and are not shut up in a house.
And he darted towards the table with presents, drew up his regiment upon their silver horses, and let them trot and gallop, and cut and slash. Mary also had softly stolen away. She too was soon tired of the walking puppets in the castle. A smart work like this was not made for stupid children. But Fritz and Mary's mother immediately desired to see the secret mechanism by which the little figures were set in motion. Counselor Drosselmeyer took the toy all apart and then put it together again. His mood has improved again. Chapter 3. The Favorite. Through the ranks of Fritz's hussars, drawn up close to the Christmas tree, Mary saw something she had not yet remarked before. It was a curious little man, who stood silent and retired as if he were waiting quietly for his turn to be noticed. His figure looked quite odd. Far too long, stout body, short, slim legs, and a very large head. But his costume led to believe that he must be a man of taste and good breeding. He wore a hussar's jacket of beautiful bright violet, fastened together with white loops and buttons, pantaloons of exactly the same color, and elegant boots. They fit as tight to his little legs if they were painted upon them. Quite a while, Mary gazed upon the little man attentively. She noticed how much good nature his face expressed and how his clear green, though somewhat too big eyes, shone with kindness and benevolence.
Dad, for whom is that charming little man by the tree there?
He shall work hard for you all, my dear. He can crack the hardest nuts with his teeth. Father took the man carefully from the table and raised up his wooden cloak. The little man stretched his mouth wide open and showed 2 rows of very white, sharp teeth. Mary put a nut into his mouth. The man had bitten it in 2 and the shell fell off. Mary caught the sweet kernel in her hand.
How wonderful!
Mary had immediately set Nutcracker to cracking nuts, but she was very attentive as to pick out the smallest, that the little man need not stretch his mouth so wide, which was not very becoming to him. In the meantime, Fritz had become tired of riding and parading his hussars. When he heard nuts cracking so merrily, he immediately wished to join his sister. Watching the little funny man tirelessly opening and closing his mouth, he laughed very heartily. Fritz always chose the biggest and hardest nuts for the Nutcracker to crack, when all at once, 3 teeth fell out of Nutcracker's mouth, and his whole underjaw became loose and trickety.
Ah, my poor dear Nutcracker! Give him to me!
That's a stupid fellow. He wants to be a nutcracker and has 4 teeth.
Give him to me!
No, Mary, he must crack nuts for me. So what if he loses all his teeth and his whole chin into the bargain? Why do you make such a fuss about that lazy fellow?
No! No! You shall not have my dear Nutcracker! See how sorrowfully he looks at me and shows me his poor mouth? You are a hard-hearted fellow. You beat your horses, and you let your soldiers kill each other.
That's the way it must be. You don't understand this, but the Nutcracker belongs as much to me as to you. Give him to me.
Mary began to cry and rolled up the sick Nutcracker in her pocket handkerchief. Then, suddenly, their father came up. I see that Nutcracker is now greatly in need of care, Mary. So I give you full authority to look over him. Besides, I wonder at you, Fritz. To ask farther duty from one who has been wounded in service. Fritz was much ashamed and stole around to the opposite end of the table to his hussars. Mary collected together Nutcracker's lost teeth, tied up his wounded chin with a nice white ribbon, and then wrapped up the poor fellow more carefully than ever in her handkerchief. Chapter 4. Wonders upon Wonders. In the drawing room of Stahlbaum's house, just as you enter, there stands on the left a high glass case. Here the children place in a perfect order all the beautiful things which are given to them every year. On the upper shelf, which Mary and Fitz cannot reach, stood all Godfather Drosselmeyer's curious machines. Immediate below, there was a shelf for the picture books. The two lower shelves, Mary and Fritz, filled up as they pleased. Mary used the lower one as a house for her dolls, while Fritz quartered his troops in the one above. And so it happened today. Fritz sets his hussars above, and Mary installed Miss Trutchen and her new doll, whose name was Miss Clara, below. It was now late in the evening. Godfather Drosselmeyer had long since gone home, yet still, the children could not leave the glass case, although their mother told them many times that it was high time to go to bed.
Is it true the soldiers also need a little rest? For as long as I am here, not one of them will dare to nod. I know that.
And under that pretext, Fritz went up to bed.
Only leave me here a little while, Mummy. I have things to do, and when they are done, I'll go to bed at once.
Well, all right, but come in soon, Mary, or it will be hard for you to be up tomorrow in the morning.
As soon as Mary found herself alone, she unrolled her handkerchief quickly and examined the wounded Nutcracker. The little man was very pale, but still, he smiled so kindly that it went straight to Mary's heart.
Ah, dear Nutcracker, please do not be angry at Fritz. He did not mean to be so rough. It is the wild soldier's life, with his hussars, that has made him a little hard-hearted. Otherwise, he is a good fellow, believe me. I will tend you very carefully until you are well and merry again. We will fasten in your teeth and set your shoulders right. Godfather Drosselmeyer understands such things. He will help you.
Mary hasn't even finished the sentence when her friend Nutcracker, as soon as she mentioned the name of Drosselmeyer, made a terrible wry face. Something darted in his eyes like prickly green flashes. Mary was just going to fall into a dreadful fright when, behold, the smiling face of the Nutcracker was before her again. Mary then thought that the light of the lamp had distorted Nutcracker's features so strangely.
Am I not a foolish girl to be so easily frightened, to think that a wooden puppet could make faces at me? That's impossible.
With this, Mary took Nutcracker in her arms and walked to the glass case.
Please, Miss Clara, be so good as to give up your bed to the sick and wounded Nutcracker and spend a night on the sofa.
Mary took out the little bed, laid Nutcracker down upon it softly, and drew the bedclothes over him almost to his nose. She locked the case and was about to go to bed when... Mary turned around. The large gilt owl that sat on the top of the clock had dropped down its wings so that they covered the whole clock face, and it stretched out its ugly head that looked just like a cat's. The clock whirred louder. Clock, whir, whir, softly clock, for Mouse King has a fine ear. Purr, hum, hum. The old song let him hear. Purr, hum, hum. Now the clock strikes softly. Purr, hum, hum. The clock whirred louder. The clock went 12 times. Mary was already pale from fright and ready to run out from the room in terror, when suddenly 1,000 little feet rushed and 1,000 little lights flashed out of the crevices in the floor. But they were not lights. No, Mary saw they were sparkling little eyes. The mice were all around, peeping out and working their way into the room. At last, the mice placed themselves in line and column, just as Fritz's soldiers did when they went to battle. Then, all at once, there arose a squeaking so terrible and piercing that it seemed to Mary's blood went dead cold in her veins. Ah, what did she saw? Close to her feet, 7 mice heads with 7 sparkling crowns rose out of the floor. Presently, the mouse's body to which these 7 heads belonged worked its way out. All the army in full chorus thrice hooray to the great mouse crowned with the 7 diadems. Suddenly, Nutcracker raised himself, threw the bedcloths off, and leapt out of bed.
Crack, crack, crack! Drive Mouse back! Crack, crack, crack! Mouse back! Crick, crack, stupid pack!
He drew his little sword and brandished it in the air.
Hey, my loyal vassals and brothers! Will you stand by me in the hard fight?
Straightway 3 scaramouches, a pantalone, 4 chimney sweepers, 2 strolling musicians, and a drummer cried out,
Yes, my lord, we will follow you to the end with fidelity and courage. To battle! To victory or death!
And they rushed after the Nutcracker, who, inspired by their support, made the dangerous leap from the upper shelf. As soon as Nutcracker had leaped down to the floor, They were heard again. Under the large table, the hateful mice have gathered their countless army, and in front of their column, the dreadful mouse with 7 heads was moving. What will happen now? What will happen now? Chapter 5. The Battle.
Beats the war march, true vassal drummer!
Immediately, as the drummer began to rattle and roll upon his drum, Fritz's soldiers leaped down upon the lowest shelf where they drew up in fine ranks. Nutcracker rushed up and down the ranks, speaking inspiring words to the troops.
Trumpeters! Enough of the trumpets!
Then he turned to the Pantalone, who had grown a little pale and whose long chin was trembling.
Honored General, I know your courage and your experience. There is need now for a quick eye and skill to find the proper moment. You will command all the cavalry and artillery. You do not need a horse, for you have very long legs and you can gallop yourself quite well. Now do your duty!
At once, Pantalone put his long, thin fingers to his mouth and whistled piercingly. And see, Fritz's hussars marched out and soon were down there on the floor. Mary saw how tiny sugar nuts were fired from cannons into dark, heavy mass of mice, covering them with white powder. The enemy was frightened to death. However, the mice managed to win some of the cannons. Each side now fought with the greatest force, and the victory was for a long time doubtful. Pantalone had made some splendid attack, but Fritz's hussars were battered by the odious balls of enemy's artillery and refused to move forward. Pantalone ordered them to retreat to the left. All the cavalry retreated and galloped home. Nutcracker was quite disturbed with their maneuver. Meanwhile, on the edge of the glass case, the china figures had drawn their ranks, headed by 2 Chinese emperors. Gardeners, friseurs, harlequins, cupids, lions, tigers, and apes fought with courage and great determination. But suddenly, one bold mouse rushed madly from the enemy ranks and bit off the head of the Chinese emperor. The latter fell and dashed to the ground with him 2 friseurs and an ape. Through the gap produced by the attack, the enemy penetrated inside the square, and in a few moments, the whole battalion was torn to pieces. Nutcracker, now completely surrounded by the enemies, was in the great peril. He tried to leap over the edge, into the glass case, but found his legs too short. Then, in wild despair, he cried,
A horse, a kingdom for a horse!
At this moment, the Mouse King, squeaking from all his 7 throats, leaped in triumph towards him. Mary could no longer control herself.
Oh, my poor Nutcracker! My poor Nutcracker!
Unconscious of what she did, Mary grasped her left shoe and threw it with all her strength into the thickest of the mice, straight at their king. In an instant, all vanished. Mary felt in her left arm a sharp pain and fell on the floor in a swoon. Chapter 6. The Sickness. When Mary woke, she found herself lying in her own bed. Beside her sat their neighbor, Surgeon Wendelstern.
She is awake at last.
Anxious mother came to her beside at once.
Oh, Mommy, are all the hateful mice gone? And is the Nutcracker safe? Tell me!
Do not talk nonsense, my dear Mary. What have the mice to do with your Nutcracker? You naughty child, you gave us such a fright. You played last night with your dolls until it was very late. You became sleepy, probably, and a stray mouse may have jumped out and frightened you. And that is strange, by the way, for there are no mice in our house as far as I know. You broke a pane of glass with your elbow and cut your arm so severely that Dr. Wendelstern was taking pieces of glass out of the wound. Thank God that I woke about midnight and not finding you in bed, went into the drawing room. There you lay upon the floor, and scattered around were many of playthings, broken china figures, gingerbread men and women. Not far off lay your left shoe.
Oh, dear Mother, those were the traces of battle between the puppets and the mice. I was afraid for the poor Nutcracker because the mice were going to take him prisoner, so I threw my shoe at them.
Well, never mind that, my dear child. The mice are all gone, and little Nutcracker stands safe and sound in the glass case.
For some days, Mary was obliged to remain in bed and take medicine, although, except a slight pain in her arm, she felt quite well. The time, during the day, always seemed very long to her. One evening, the doors opened, and Godfather Drosselmeyer entered.
I must see now for myself how it goes with sick and wounded Mary.
The counselor put his hand in his pocket, and slowly he drew the nutcracker out with his lost teeth nicely fastened in, and his lame chin well set. Mary cried aloud with joy.
Oh, how lovely!
But still, you must confess, Mary, that Nutcracker's figure is none of the finest, neither can his face be called handsome. How this ugliness came to his family and became hereditary, I will now tell you, if you wish. Want to hear a story of the Princess Pirlipat and the Lady Mouserings and the skillful watchmaker?
Sure, tell them, dear Godfather, tell me.
And the counselor began his story. Chapter 7. The Story of the Hard Nut. Pirlipat's mother was the wife of a king and so a queen. That's why Pirlipat, at the moment of her birth, straightway became a true princess. The king was beside himself with joy when he saw his beautiful daughter. He was so glad that he danced and jumped about upon one leg.
Hey, hey! Was there ever seen anyone more beautiful than my little Pirlipat?
And all the ministers, generals, presidents jumped about on one leg like the king.
No, never!
And it was true. For as long as the world has been standing, a lovelier child was never born than the Princess Pirlipat. Her little face seemed made of white and rosy silk, her eyes were living sparkling blue, and her hair curled in bright golden ringlets. Besides this, Pirlipat came into the world with 2 rows of little pearly teeth. All the court was delighted. The queen alone was very anxious and uneasy, and no one knew why. She ordered to watch over Pirlipat's cradle day and night. Besides that, the doors were guarded by soldiers and 2 nurses always remained in the room. 6 more nurses were to sit before the cradle to watch over Pirlipat night after night. But the most foolish it seemed that each of these 6 maids must have a cat upon her lap and stroke it the whole night, thus keeping it continually purring. It is impossible that you, dear children, can guess why the queen gave these orders. But I know and will straightway tell you. Once the king, Pirlipat's father, in order to show that he was in no want of gold and silver, ordered a great feast of sausages. He leaped into his carriage and went himself to invite all the kings and princes to a so-called plate of soup.
You know, my dear, how extremely I am fond of sausages.
The queen knew at once what he meant. He was asking her to take upon herself the making of sausages. The Lord Treasurer was immediately ordered to send to the kitchen the great golden sausage cauldron and the silver stewpans. A large fire of sandalwood was made in the oven, and the queen put on her beautiful embroidered apron. When the sweet smell of the sausage meat began to steam up out of the cauldron, a small whispering voice was heard.
Give me a little of the fat, sister. I should like my part of the feast. I, too, am a queen.
The queen knew very well that it was Lady Mouserings speaking. Lady Mouserings had lived many years in the king's palace. She was declaring herself to be related to the royal family and saying that she rules in her own kingdom of Mousalia. The queen was not thinking Lady Mouserings to be a queen, yet she was ready to allow her a little feast on this great holiday.
Come out then, Lady Mouserings. You are welcome to a little of the fat.
Lady Mouserings jumped upon the hearth very quickly and began catching with her little paws one piece of fat after the other. But all the cousins and aunts of the Lady Mouserings came running out also, and even her 7 sons. They all fell at once upon the fat so quickly that the queen became terrified and couldn't say a word. But unfortunately, the chief maid of honor chased away the unwelcomed guests. Only one piece of fat remained. The king's mathematician, who was summoned directly, helped the queen to accurately distribute it into all the sausages. Drums and trumpets were now heard without. All the invited kings and princesses arrived at the sausage feast. Already in the first course, that of the liver sausage, everybody observed that the king grew pale. But in the second course, which consisted of the black pudding sausages, he sat back upon his throne, sobbing and moaning, and held both hands to his face. All sprang up from the table. The royal physician tried in vain to feel the pulse of the unhappy monarch. At last, after much coaxing, and after the application of some very strong remedies, like burnt goose feathers and so on, the king seemed to come a little to himself.
Too little fat!
Oh, my poor unhappy king! How great must be your suffering! Lady Mouse Rings with her 7 sons and aunts and cousins have eaten up the fat!
Then the king, full of rage, leaped from the table, resolved to take vengeance upon Lady Mouserings and her family for having eaten up the fat of his sausages. This delicate business he appointed to the royal watchmaker and magician. This man had a name the same as I have it, Christian Elias Drosselmeyer. To drive Lady Mouserings and her family from the palace, he invented curious little machines in which a piece of roasted fat was fastened to a thread. These machines Drosselmeyer placed around Lady Mousering's dwelling. Lady Mouserings was wise and saw through Drosselmeyer's craft, but every one of her 7 sons and many of her cousins and aunts went into Drosselmeyer's machines. Lady Mouserings, with all that was left of her family, escaped the kingdom that very day. The court had gone mad with joy, but the queen was very anxious. She knew the character of Lady Mouserings and was sure she would not let the death of her sons go unavenged. And so it happened. Lady Mouserings appeared one day.
My sons, my cousins, and aunts are killed! Take care, queen, for the Mouse Queen could snap your little princess in two! Take good care.
Then she disappeared and was not seen again.
It's enough for tonight. I will tell you the rest tomorrow.
No matter how hard Mary begged Godfather Drosselmeyer to go on, all was in vain.
Tell me, Godfather Drosselmeyer, is it then really true that you invented mousetraps?
I am a skillful watchmaker. If I can't invent a mousetrap...
Chapter 8. The Story of Hard Nut continued. Next evening, Counselor Drosselmeyer came again to visit Mary.
You now know, children, why the queen gave orders to guard the beautiful Princess Pirlipat with such care.
Once, late in the night, one of the 2 chief nurses started up out of the deep sleep and saw before her a large, dreadful mouse. The monster stood upon its hind feet and had laid its ugly head on the face of the princess. With a cry of terror, the nurse had jumped up, all awoke, but in a moment, Lady Mousering sneaked through a hole in the floor and disappeared. Little Pirlipat awoke at the noise and wept bitterly.
Thank heaven she lives!
But how great was their terror when they saw how the sweet, beautiful princess changed. Instead of the white face with golden locks, a large, ill-shaped head sat upon the thin, shriveled body. Blue eyes were changed into green staring ones, and Pirlipat's little mouth had stretched itself from ear to ear. The queen was crying and wailing, but the king laid all the blame upon the court watchmaker and mechanic Christian Elias Drosselmeyer.
Drosselmeyer should restore the Prince Pirlipat to her former condition within 4 weeks. Otherwise, he should suffer a shameful death at the hands of an executioner. It's an order.
Drosselmeyer was terrified. He begged straightway for permission to speak with the royal astronomer and asked him to set up the horoscope of Princess Pirlipat. It was a great deal of trouble, as the lines of fate grew all the while more and more complex. But, fortunately, the stars gave him some clue. To be free from the magic which had deformed her, Princess Pirlipat needed only to eat the kernel of the nut Crackatuck. The nut Crackatuck had such a hard shell that cannon of 48 pounds could be wheeled over it without breaking it. This hard nut must be cracked with the teeth before the princess, by a man who had never been shaved and had never worn boots. After handling the kernel to the princess with closed eyes, the young man must not open them until he had marched 7 steps backward without stumbling. Delighted, Drosselmeyer immediately informed the king about it.
See to it, dear friend, that the unshorn young man in shoes will immediately be brought to the palace with a nutcracker Crackatuck, and take care that he drinks no wine beforehand. He should not stumble as he goes the 7 steps backward like a crab. Afterward, he may drink as much as he pleases.
Drosselmeyer was very much confused by these words.
My king, I discovered only the method, but the nutcrackatuck and the young man to crack it were yet to be sought. Honestly, I am quite doubtful whether Nut or Nutcracker would ever be found.
The king in great anger swung his scepter and roared with the voice of a lion.
Then, off goes your head!
It was very fortunate for the frightened Drosselmeyer that the king's dinner had been cooked better than usual this day. So after drinking a glass of stomach drops, he cancelled the execution. Instead, he decided that the watchmaker and the royal astronomer will both leave the court instantly, not to return without the Nutcrackatuck and the Nutcracker. Here the counselor broke off again, and promised to finish the tale on the following evening. Chapter 9. Conclusion of the story of Hard Nut. The next evening, as soon as the candles were lighted, Godfather Drosselmeyer appeared again and continued his story. Drosselmeyer and the astronomer were traveling for 15 years, but they saw no sign of the NUTCRACKER. It would take me a month, children, to tell where they went and what strange things happened to them. Yet I will tell you that after all those years, once came a day when Drosselmeyer sank into despair and decided to return to his native city, Nuremberg. Was it not all the same where to seek for this cursed NUTCRACKER? As soon as they arrived at Nuremberg, Drosselmeyer went to his cousin, Christopher Zacharias Drosselmeyer, a puppet maker. The watchmaker told him the whole story of the Princess Pirlipat, Lady Mouserings, and the NUTCRACKER.
Ah, brother, what a story! What strange things are these?
Immediately after that, Christopher Zacharias tossed his hat and wig up in the air and hugged his cousin firmly.
Brother, you are safe! You are safe, I say! I must be wonderfully mistaken if that very NUTCRACKER is not in my possession.
He then quickly brought a little box and took out of it a gilded nut of moderate size.
There! See? Many years ago, a stranger came here at Christmas Eve with a sack full of nuts, which he offered for sale. He had put down his sack upon the ground near the door of my shop, for he got into a quarrel with a local nut seller. At the same moment, a heavily laden wagon passed directly over the sack. All the nuts were cracked in pieces except this one, which the stranger consented to sell me for a bright coin of the year 1720. I thought that strange, but as I found in my pocket just such a coin as the man wanted, I bought the nut and gilded over it for no exact reason. I also didn't know why I bought the nut so dear or why I was storing it.
The astronomer carefully scraped off the gold and found upon the shell the word Kratatuk, engraved in Chinese characters. The mysterious nut was found. The joy of the travelers was beyond bounds, but after a while the astronomer looked thoughtfully at his friend.
My worthy colleague, good fortune never comes alone. Take my word for it, we have found not only the NUTCRACKER, but also the young man who is to crack it. I mean, nobody else than your cousin's son. This very night, I will set up his horoscope.
The cousin's son was in truth a handsome young man who had never been shaved and who had never worn boots. On Christmas days, he wore a handsome red coat trimmed with gold and had a sword at his side. In this fine dress, he would stand near the doors to his father's shop and out of gallantry crack nuts for the young girls. For that, everybody called him the handsome NUTCRACKER. On the following morning, the astronomer fell upon Drosselmeyer's neck.
It's him! He is found!
Meanwhile, the king had promised to the one who will crack the nut and restore the princess her lost beauty, the hand of Pirlipat, and half of his kingdom. On hearing that, Drosselmeyer and the astronomer immediately had sent information to the palace of the discovery of the NUTCRACKER and the NUTCRACKER. As soon as Princess Pirlipat saw young Drosselmeyer, she laid her little hands upon her heart.
Ah! If this might be the one who is to crack the NUTCRACKER and become my husband.
Young Drosselmeyer, without hesitation, had put the NUTCRACKER between his teeth, and the shell broke into many pieces. He then quickly removed the kernel, shut his eyes, and gave the nut to the princess. After that, he began to walk backward. The princess straightway swallowed the kernel, and behold, her ugly shape was gone, and in its place appeared a most beautiful young girl that looked like an angel with her face of roses and lilies, of delicate white and red silk. Drums and trumpets mingled their sounds with the loud rejoicings of the people. The king and his whole court danced, as at Pirlipat's birth, upon one leg, and the queen had to be tended with cologne water because she had fallen into a swoon from delight. Young Drosselmeyer, who had still 7 steps to perform, was a bit confused by the tumult. All was going well until the moment when he moved back his right foot for the 7th and the last step. Then Lady Mouserings rose out of the floor, and down came young Drosselmeyer's foot upon her head, and he stumbled so that hardly kept himself from falling. As quick as thought, the young man was changed to the former ugly figure of the princess. His body became so shriveled up that was hardly able to support his great misshapen head with large staring eyes and awful wide open mouth. The watchmaker and astronomer were numbed with terror and fright, but they noticed that young Drosselmeyer has trodden on Lady Mousering's neck, so she was rolling on the floor in agony.
Oh, crack, it's a hard nut of you. I now must die. Son with 7 crowns will bite Nutcracker at night and revenge his mother's death.
With this cry, Lady Mouserings died, and the royal oven heater carried out her body. But when the unfortunate young Drosselmeyer approached the princess, she covered her face in terror.
Away! Away with you, ugly Nutcracker!
The court-martial immediately took the young man by the narrow shoulders and pushed him out the doors. The king was full of anger because the watchmaker and astronomer had wished to give him a nutcracker for a son-in-law, and he put all the blame upon them and banished them forever from the capital. But the astronomer straightway set another horoscope for the young Drosselmeyer and declared that he would conduct himself well in his new station, and in spite of his deformity, would yet become a prince and a king. His former beauty would return. When the son of Lady Mouserings, the Mouse King will fall by his hand, and a maiden will love him in spite his ugly shape. This, children, is the story of the hard nut, and now you know why people say often, "That was a hard nut," and how come nutcrackers are so ugly. The counselor finished his story.
That Perlipat is quite ill-natured and ungrateful.
If Nutcracker is anything of a brave man, he would quickly settle his matters with the Mouse King and would get rid of his old shape again very soon.
Chapter 10. The Victory. When the cut is deep, every one of you must know how it hurts and how long it takes to heal. Mary was obliged to remain in bed for a whole week, but at last she became entirely well and could play about the room as merrily as ever. Now she knew that her nutcracker is none other than young Drosselmeyer from Nuremberg, bewitched by Lady Mouserings.
Believe me, dear Master Drosselmeyer, if you are not able to move or talk to me, remember that I am your good friend in your strife with the Mouse King. I want to help you whenever you have need of it.
Nutcracker remained still and motionless, but it seemed to Mary as if a gentle sigh was breathed in the glass case, and scarce audibly a voice rang out.
Mary mine, I'll be yours. And you mine, Mary mine.
Not long after, one moonlight night, Mary was waked by a strange rattling that seemed to come out of a corner of the room. Mary wanted to shout out, but her voice failed her, for she saw the Mouse King emerge out of a hole in the wall. Suddenly, he sprang upon the little table that stood close by Mary's bed.
You must give me all your sugar plums, all your marchpane, little thing, or I will bite your nutcracker.
Then he sprang down again and disappeared through the hole in the wall. Poor Mary looked very pale in the morning. 100 times she wanted to tell her mother, or at least Fritz, about what happened, but she thought that no one will believe her. Little Mary wished to save Nutcracker. So, when evening came, she laid all her sweets down before the glass case. The next morning, her mother noticed it.
It is strange what brings the mice all at once into the sitting room. See, poor Mary, they have eaten up all of your marchpane.
The greedy Mouse King didn't like marchpane with filling and sugar plums, but he had gnawed them with his sharp teeth so that they had to be thrown away. The very next night, Mouse King returned again to Mary's room.
Give me your sugar puppets, little thing, or I will bite your nutcracker.
Mary was very sad. The next morning, she went to the glass case and looked sadly at her sugar figures. There were a pretty shepherd and a shepherdess watching over a whole flock of milky white lambs. Next came 2 postmen with letters in their hands, and then 4 neat pairs of nicely dressed boys and girls that rocked at seesaws. The tears came into Mary's eyes.
Oh, dear Master Drosselmeyer, there is nothing that I will not do to save you. But this is very hard.
At evening, all sugar figures were sitting down at the front of the glass case.
Well, that's too much. A mouse must have gone into the glass case. All poor Mary's sugar figures are gnawed and bitten in pieces.
Mary could not hold the tears, but she soon smiled again. She knew that she was doing all that only to save her nutcracker. Ah, but what a night did Mary pass. Something cold as ice tapped her, and there against her arm, and crept hideous upon her cheek, and squeaked and squealed in her ear. The hateful Mouse King sat upon her shoulders.
Wise mouse goes not into the house. I will not be caught. Give all, new dress, picture books, all the best, or you shall have no rest. I will tear and bite Nutcracker at night. Get.
The next day, Mary stepped to the glass case and, sobbing, said to the Nutcracker,
Oh, my dear good Master Drosselmeyer, what can I do for you? I'll give up all my picture books and even my new beautiful dress to the hateful mouse. But the Mouse King will ask more and more. What should I do? What should I do?
As little Mary was grieving in this way, the large mouth of the Nutcracker began to work and twist.
Ah, dearest, best Miss Stahlbaum, how shall I thank you? No picture books, no Christmas dress. Get me a sword. A sword! For the rest I will provide, even if...
Here, speech left him. Mary wasn't frightened. On the contrary, she jumped for joy. She had now found a way to save the Nutcracker. But where should she get a sword for him? At last, she decided to ask Fritz, and in the evening, when their parents had gone out, told her brother all that had happened with her because of Nutcracker and Mouse King. Fritz reflected long upon the poor account which she gave of the bravery of his hussars. He asked once more very seriously if it were so. And when Mary swore to him that she is telling the truth, he ran quickly to the glass case. He addressed his hussars in a speech, and then, as a punishment, forbade them for a year to play the Hussars' Grand March.
I will help your friends to find a saber for Nutcracker. Yesterday I permitted an old colonel of the cuirassiers to retire upon a pension, so he has no farther use for his fine sharp saber.
The said colonel was now living on the pension which Fritz had allowed him, in the farthest corner of the third shelf. Children took his fine silver saber from him and gave it to the Nutcracker. Mary could scarcely get to sleep that night, she was so anxious and afraid. About midnight, she heard a strange rustling and rattling and slashing in the sitting room. Then suddenly,
The Mouse King! The Mouse King!
Mary sprang out of bed, but all was still. After a while, she heard a gentle knocking at the door.
Dearest, kindest Miss Stahlbaum, open the door without fear! Good news!
Mary knew the voice of the young Drosselmeyer, so she put on her dress and opened. Little Nutcracker stood outside with a bloody sword in his right hand and a candle in his left. As soon as he saw Mary, he bent down on one knee.
You, O lady, you alone filled me with knightly courage and gave this arm strength to bring down the terrible enemy who dared disturb your sleep. The treacherous Mouse King is dead. I beg you to receive the tokens of victory from a faithful knight.
With these words, Nutcracker took the 7 golden crowns of Mouse King and presented them to Mary.
You know not what beautiful things I could show you at this moment while my enemy lies vanquished. Will you be so good as to follow me? Best, kindest Miss Stahlbaum.
Chapter 11. The Puppet King. Nutcracker went ahead and Mary followed him. They stopped before an antique wardrobe. Nutcracker climbed very nimbly up the carved figures and ornaments and grasped the large tassel which hung down at the back of the coat. As soon as he pulled the tassel with all his might, neat little stairs of cedar wood fell down from the pocket of the fur coat to the floor.
Climb up, if you please, dearest Mary.
As soon as Mary had gone up, a light broke upon her, and all at once she stood upon a wonderful meadow surrounded by millions of sparks.
We are now upon Candy Meadow.
Oh, how beautiful!
Mary very soon heard a louder rushing of water and then saw a great beautiful lake where gorgeous silver-white swans with golden collars swam. The swans were singing sweet tunes while little diamond fish were dancing merrily in the rosy water.
This is the very lake which Godfather Drosselmeyer was going to make for me.
Nutcracker clapped his little hands together and the rose lake began to rush louder. The waves rolled higher, and Mary saw 2 golden scaled dolphins. They were drawing a boat of shells. They picked up Mary and Nutcracker and continued their rush over water. Ah, how delightful it was to sail along a boat of shells, swaying on the rosy waves.
Oh, look, dear Master Drosselmeyer. There's the Princess Perlipat down in the water. Oh, how sweetly she smiles at me. Just look.
Oh, kindest Miss Stahlbaum, that is not the Princess Perlipat. It is you. It's your own lovely face smiles so sweetly out of the rose lake.
Upon this, Mary blushed. At this moment, they were lifted out of the boat and carried to the shore. They now found themselves in a little bright and sparkling forest.
We are in Sweetmeat Grove, but yonder is the capital.
And what a sight for Mary! Instead of roofs, the houses had diadems set upon them, braided and twisted in the most intricate manner, and the towers were crowned with multicolored garlands. As Mary and Nutcracker passed through the gate built of macaroons and candied fruits, silver soldiers saluted them.
Welcome, best prince! Welcome to Confectionville!
After a few steps, Mary and Nutcracker found themselves before a castle glimmering with rosy light and crowned with 100 airy towers. Beautiful bouquets of violets, narcissus, tulips, and dalilahs were hung about the walls.
We are now in front of Marshpain Castle.
Mary was completely lost in admiration of this magic place. At this moment, soft music was heard. The doors of the place opened, and 4 ladies richly and splendidly dressed went out. Mary saw in a moment that they were princess born. They embraced the Nutcracker in the tenderest manner.
Oh, how we are glad of your return, dear prince! Oh, brother!
Nutcracker seemed very much loved. He wiped the tears out of his eyes, then took Mary by the hand.
This is Miss Marie Stahlbaum, and she is the preserver of my life. Had she not thrown her shoe at the right time, had she not found me the sword of a pensioned colonel, I should now be lying in my grave, torn and bitten to pieces by the terrible Mouse King. Oh, she is a beauty, dearest Miss Stahlbaum. Whether Princess Perlipat can compare with her in beauty and goodness, no, I say no.
No!
Princess then fell upon Mary's neck. Then they brought the finest exotic fruits and sugar things and started to prepare a delicious meal. Meanwhile, Nutcracker was giving a full account of the dreadful battle between his army and that of the Mouse King. But soon, it seemed to Mary as if his words became less and less audible. Presently, she saw a silver fog before her, in which the princess, Nutcracker, and herself too were all drowning. A humming was heard, which seemed to die away in the distance. And now Mary was raised up, as if upon the mounting waves, higher and higher, higher and higher, higher and higher. Chapter 12. The Conclusion. It went. Mary fell down from an immense height, but when she opened her eyes, there she lay upon her little bed. Her mother stood by her.
How can you sleep so long? Breakfast is long waiting for you.
Oh, Mother, you cannot think where young Master Drosselmeyer led me last night. What a beautiful things I have seen!
Then she told her the whole story, almost as accurately as I have told it, while her mother listened in astonishment.
You have had a long and very beautiful dream, dear Mary, but now drive all that nonsense out of your head.
Mary argued that she had not dreamed, but had actually seen what she had told. So her mother led her to the glass case and took out the Nutcracker.
How can you believe that this wooden Nuremberg puppet can have life or stir?
Mother, I know this little Nutcracker is young Master Drosselmeyer of Nuremberg, Godfather Drosselmeyer's nephew.
Then even her father and Fritz laughed heartily.
Listen to me, Mary. Drive that nonsense out of your head. If I ever hear you say again that silly, ugly Nutcracker is the nephew of your godfather Drosselmeyer, I will throw him out of the window.
Poor Mary dared not now speak of her adventures, but she thought so much about the wonderful fairy tale kingdom that her whole soul was full. Some time after this, it happened that the counselor was repairing a clock in Dr. Stahlbaum's house. Mary sat close by the glass case, and, lost in her dreams, was gazing at Nutcracker. Suddenly, the words broke from her lips.
Oh, dear Master Drosselmeyer, if you actually were living, I would not reject you like Princess Perlipat.
Then there was a strange clap, and the knock, so loud that Mary sank from her chair in a swoon. When she came to herself, she saw her godfather, who held by the hand a little but a very well-shaped young man in a handsome red coat. The sword by his side flashed and sparkled brightly, and he carried under his arm a silken cap. The young man had brought Mary a great many handsome playthings, the nicest marchpane, and the same sugar figures which the Mouse King had bitten to pieces. At table, amiable fellow cracked nuts for the whole company. The hardest could not resist them. But scarcely was Mary along with the young Drosselmeyer when he stooped upon one knee.
Oh, my very best Miss Stahlbaum. You see here at your feet the happy Drosselmeyer whose life you saved. You said that you would not reject me like the hateful Princess Perlipat if I had become ugly for your sake. From that moment, I became myself again. Oh, excellent Miss Stahlbaum, make me happy with your dear hand. Share with me my crown and kingdom, and we will both rule in our Marshpain Castle.
Mary raised the youth.
Dear Master Drosselmeyer, I just cannot say no.
Mary became Drosselmeyer's betrothed bride. It is told that after a year, he came and carried her away in a golden carriage drawn by silver horses. There danced at their wedding 22,000 sugar figures. And that is the full tale of Nutcracker and Mouse King.